So Janice Gladue, I have been wanting so much for you to be in this Leadership Now series because your message is so incredible. And so before we get into your message, just a little quick introduction. So you are an author. I always knew you were going to be a great author, and you were just published in the Great Canadian Women book series. Yes, you can hold up the book. People can get that now, right?
Yes, it's on Amazon, actually.
Nice, nice. You'll get to read her story, which is so powerful, heartbreaking, powerful, and exciting, which is what we're going to dive into today. You're also the COO of TIPI, which is an Indigenous insurance company that is the second largest in all of Canada, right?
Yes.
Yes. And she's a mother of two. And she really, when I think about you, Janice, just the courage, the passion, the perseverance. In fact, we were talking about this right before everyone got on. I started coaching you. I never met you in person until last year. I was coaching you in 2011. You lived in Calgary at the time. You're now in Saskatchewan. And I remember asking you the question of writing your dreams down. You were going to create a vision board. And you said, I don't know how to dream. And it blew me away because I didn't understand how people didn't know how to dream. And what you taught me along that was that we all have blinders on, right? Because our lives are based on our beliefs, our experiences, the things that we know. And when we seek to understand other people's point of view, realize that not everyone is the same as us, we have more empathy. And I just remember like, wow, how do I teach you to dream? So do you know how to dream now?
Yeah, you know what? Back then in 2011, I was so busy just trying to figure out how to survive. Survive all of the trauma and all of the other things that were on my plate. And, where I am now with my life, I don't know if I actively dreamt of all the pieces where they are right now, but I always aspired. For me, continuing to grow and to push through the pain and to, just dare to create, a different circumstance. So I guess maybe that's called dreaming, but I never really, for me, dreaming was really fanciful. And I am on a more practical level, I struggled with it, but this is where I'm at.
That's right. It's one day at a time, one step at a time. So your topic is leaning into gratitude. Tell us why that's important and talk about your story along the way.
So for me, leaning into gratitude is, I think the thing, and I told you, is I attribute like my survival of so many traumatic experiences to just being able to lean into gratitude. Like there have been moments where I have been absolutely crushed in deep, dark, desperate places, not knowing how I was going to even take out the garbage or do those simple things in life. And just in those moments, I was able to just be thankful that, that trauma didn't end up with my life being taken or that something worse didn't happen. And so in those moments and in that gratitude, it fueled hope. And it fueled, I guess that hope fueled, a desire to grow. I tell my kids right now, always be grateful because it could always be worse and never ask what else. Like I've learned that, when you're in the depths of, a really bad spot, like I've learned, don't ask what else, because sometimes you'll get an answer you don't like.
Right.
But, I do tell my kids, like, lean into gratitude. Like there's always something to be grateful for.
But it's a journey, especially knowing your journey and, not to get into the depth of it, but just to give the viewers just kind of a little snapshot. You were actually in the foster care system in Canada from the age of 4 to 20. And there was a lot of trauma that happened in the foster care system. In fact, within your chapter that you wrote within the great Women of Canada book series, you talk about that. And how did you get out of that? Like, what lessons, were you always someone that could find the positive and things to be grateful for?
You know, there was one moment where I was actually out of high school and I reconnected with someone that I'd grown up with. And she's like, she's like, we would never have known. You were always smiling. You were always so happy and joyful. But, while I was in care, I was, I guess, fortunate. And I guess this comes where gratitude comes in. I was fortunate that my time in foster care from age 4 to age 20 was that I actually lived in one home with one family for 13 years. So in amongst, but there was other, I suffered sexual abuse, I suffered shaming, struggled with the whole bit of belonging. There were many, many things that happened during that time. But again, like I'm able to say, like, I'm grateful. I'm grateful that I was able to have a sort of normal life in one place, have a place where I grew up, where a lot of children in care don't have that.
Sure.
I also, while I was in care, so when I was taken into care, there's a thing in Canada called the Sixties Scoop, where the Department of Indian Affairs, they would go and it was practice, a bureaucratic practice where they would take Indigenous children and foster them out and adopt them out to non-Indigenous families. So essentially sort of removing them from their families, from their culture. And I didn't find out until I was sometime in my 20s that I was actually selected to be adopted to Arkansas. So I'm grateful that my biological aunt and uncle had some sort of level of guardianship over my file in care and wouldn't sign off on the adoption.
Wow.
Right? Because I could be, one of your American sisters as opposed to one of your Canadian sisters. And so, you know, growing up, coming out of care, when you age out effectively, there's another layer that comes with that. There's the whole sort of issues with abandonment. Huge. Kind of aging out triggers that in a large way. Not having anybody or anything belonging to no one. I was saying that in care, I was fortunate because I maintained a connection to my biological family. My cookum, like in our language, is my grandmother, my biological grandmother. She was a medicine woman. She was a bundle keeper, very spiritually connected and gifted. And so I would get taken from my foster home and taken, to the reservation and experience those spiritual ceremonies and practices with my biological family.
Okay.
Right. So I've been able to, have the benefit of sort of both worlds.
So you had the benefit, even when you were in foster care, you still got to see your grandma?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
And my biological mom, those weren't as positive because of her struggle with alcoholism and but knew my siblings, as an adult, we've grown our relationships more. Right. It's kind of it's been a journey of its own, finding that space of belonging. And that's really why, part of the foundation of the story that I shared in She is Strong and Free, the Great Canadian Woman, was to sort of, bring forward, that there are challenges with belonging, and particularly that came out of, for me, the 60s Scoop and my experiences.
This morning I posted the quote, and it was so crazy how things always work out that I'll find a quote and it matches the story or the leadership now that I'm doing, and it was talking about perspective. That our perspective will either create a prison or it will create a passport. And really, the choice is up to us. So, knowing you have to flip the flow, you have to flip your perspective because so many times people get stuck in the story. Things happen. Life is crappy. It's life is messy. And yet, to be able to go, what can I do? Who am I? How do I move forward? Because you have this abandonment, and there's so many things that you'd be grateful for because you still had the opportunity to stay connected with your family and you had great traditions that were instilled into you. Yeah, on the flip side, you have this whole other chaotic mess. And now you get out of the foster care system and you're an adult. Walk us through what happened. How did you get to where you are? Because now you're a COO of a very successful company, and watching way back in 2011, just when you first started, I think there was 5 people in the company. What got you there? What decisions?
Well, so one of the things that I've always done, especially as a young adult, was seek, you know, professional support. And there was like times where I'd be like, I struggle with, how to figure out how can I move from loving my biological mom out of like, I guess, obligation and necessity and saying, because she's my mother, and moving it to a more authentic, free, sort of loving, connected relationship. And so I said, I'm going to go to counseling and I'm going to find someone to do that. Um, I also, wanted, and I also sought different kind of modalities. So EMDR, talking about how do I can reframe some of those traumatic experiences so that I can not get stuck in them and be able to grow through them. Um, I actually traveled a lot and I worked with growing up because I was raised by Mennonite people that were very hardworking as culturally. They were very hardworking. They were a farming family. That served me really well because I have a strong work ethic. Um, my experience with trauma and trying to understand, I've always been driven to try understand, to look at things differently. That served me well because I think what I'm able to provide in the work that I do now and to show value is in my ability to look at things, narrowly, more fully, upside down and backwards, right? And try, I guess, always being considerate of that my perspective is only mine. What else? I'm constantly asking questions. What else? What else is there can be a benefit? So then when I was, so I worked, like I worked a lot. I traveled all over Canada, always had really good jobs that challenged me. And then I became a mother when I was 33. Now that itself was a little bit of a, um, I guess I spurred an identity crisis because I had always been a worker
Mm.
and then I didn't know anything else other than that. I soon found myself to be a single mother and living in a city that I didn't have any supports. And, you know, and also I think I missed a really big thing in there. um, in 2006, I had come out of a relationship. This was, again, late 20s, I think. And I actually had an ex of mine who I had been separated from, hadn't been in a relationship for a long time. Uh, I was attacked by him. At the time, he was wearing a mask. I was gagged, I was zip tied, I was duct taped.
Mm.
Um, and it really set me sideways.
Whew.
And that was where I said I had to learn how to take out the garbage. I found my way to a clinical psychologist who was absolutely amazing.
Hmm.
And, when we talk about, taking steps to grow, he would be like, your challenge today is for you to learn to take out the garbage. I'm like, I'm not going outside, and so that was the one thing that it was about taking steps. And
Hmm.
so I use that now in my life. You know, my challenges aren't as great as that now. So I still look back on that and say, what are the lessons that have come to me through that trauma?
So, I mean, listening to your story, and knowing your story, and every time I hear it, it just, it tugs on my heart. And as I said, I have the most respect for you because you're a woman who looks for the less. We all have opportunities in life. We all have choices. We can choose to be the victim, or we can choose to move forward. And as you said, taking out the garbage, one step at a time, one step at a time. But forgiveness has to come into it. There's somehow, some way that forgiveness has to play a part in order for you to ever be get into gratitude and move forward. Was it hard for you?
You know what? I can't say that I've gotten to forgiveness. I think I've got to understanding.
Okay.
Um, but one of the things is that, so when I left Saskatoon, this is where I grew up, I essentially like fled to Calgary, like to get space to, just be able to breathe. And that's how I found my way to being a mother. Um, and so now I find myself back in Saskatoon. And when I initially moved back, I was so busy, like making sure that my family, my children, everything were good, with being okay, being back, being in a new place. That it wasn't until a few months later that I recognized that I had trauma triggers. And so I had to go back and see, the psychologist that had initially helped me. And so I think it's always trying to, like, I'm here now and I recognize that I'm in the process of finding myself outside of that trauma. And, you know, um, that's like the day to day stuff. And I am, like, again, incredibly fortunate that while I'm here and dealing with that stuff and working through it, I get to be here close to my family. Like, I get to be here close to my lifelong friends who I take as family, and I get to work for an incredible company with great people that I feel like not just enthused about the technicalities of the work, but I'm hugely invested in the success because I believe in who we are as a company, and I love the families that we support, and I happen to work with some really great people.
Just listening to it, taking you'll talk a little bit about the story, and then you flip back into gratitude, and it really is leaning into gratitude because gratitude does something different. It unlocks life. And every time you speak, when I hear that, it's like it's life, it's moving forward, it's stepping forward. It's not being hamstrung to the past. It's like, no, I get to do this. I love helping. And and gratitude is a choice. Gratitude is a practice. And there are times, and especially looking at what's happening in the world today and understanding, sure, the United States is different from Canada, but we're all interconnected. So how do you lean into gratitude on a daily basis? What is your gratitude practice?
First of all, music
Mm.
is like a great fuel. So I love to have music in the morning. And you know what? One of the things that I've I consciously work at is um, joy.
Mm.
It's not a natural predisposition for me, um, and I make concerted efforts. I've actually made a law in my house that every day it is a requirement that my children give me huge, giant hugs every day. Like, you are not like, we haven't sort of set a punishment because it can't not happen. Right? There's no
Yeah, just
consequence because
punishing your kids for not hugging.
I'm like, because there's no option,
Right.
and so just doing those things and making them part of the daily when they may not be natural. I grew up where hugging was frowned upon. You know, delaying going to bed and asking questions was frowned upon. And so those are the things that I really work hard at building space for in our home.
Mm.
I have a really embarrassed, I would never do it in public. I have a persona that talks with a really bad, like, impediment, sort of dialect. I don't know what it is, but I do it with my kids. Like, I strapped on skates the other day after 20 plus years. It wasn't necessarily something that I wanted to do,
Mm.
but I made that effort to
Mm.
show my children something different. And that kind of makes me emotional because I didn't have it. And it's really, really important to me that they have joy in their life
Mm.
and that they know that their joy is important. I'm sorry, like, my kids are, I'm so hugely invested
Mm.
in them having a very different experience than mine. I laugh because my kids are very spoiled. Um, I grew up the way I grew up, and my partner, Jose, um, you know, his family came from Chile, um, you know, as a result of the Pinochet uprising. And so we both had, our struggles. We didn't have a lot of extra money. Our kids are spoiled. And I never let my kids forget that they need to show some gratitude. And, of course, we're all under sort of COVID restrictions. We just had the holidays. And so we were limited. We couldn't see anybody. And so, I cooked, we had our meal together, we had our time and gifts. And the thing that I will carry with me forever is how many times throughout the day that my children, unprompted, singularly, like by themselves, came up and hugged me and said, "This is like the best day ever. This Christmas is the best." And to me, like, that is success.
Yeah.
And I want more of that in my life.
But that's such a gift. That's who you are, is to be able to take the mess and look for the lesson and truly become what you've always wanted to be. And not everyone does that, Janice. Not everyone does that. And from the time I met you, you were so hungry. You've always been hungry to learn, to be better, to do better, to provide what you didn't have. And not just for your girls. I listened to what you do within your company and just who you are as an individual. And if we could have more leaders like you, more role models who are willing to be authentic, to lean into the uncomfortable. Everyone has a story, every single person. But when we look at, okay, what did we learn? Not what happened, but what did we learn, and how can we use this to help move us forward instead of keeping us stuck? That's what you do day
Yeah.
in and day out. You are proud and you are free. And because I remember telling you years ago that your story needed to be written because you give people hope. You talked about before we started this that there's a thing called post-traumatic growth. Will you talk about that?
Oh yeah, I was sort of preparing for today, and I always, like I said, it's just kind of in my nature to look at other perspectives and, how do other people view things? And, so there's gratitude journals and, people are selling a lot of, ways to build in the area of gratitude. And I came across that there are actually two psychologists, Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun, who have defined post-traumatic growth.
Hmm.
And it talks about, people that come through trauma and how they're able to find lessons in the ashes of all the pain. And so, I said, I want to go and I want to find more about that, because I've always said that, I said earlier when we started that for me, like gratitude has been like the fuel to my survival. And for and that, you know, in the in some instance, I would say that gratitude has saved my life.
Mm.
And so for me now, I want to dig a little bit more and read about post-traumatic growth, because I'm like, that's the biggest thing that has ever made sense to, how through trauma I've been able to be like, well, at least it sounds really bad. And I hope it's not triggering for someone, but when I was attacked and my life, he choked me, and there was no strength left in me. I got to the point where if this is the way it's supposed to be, this is the way it will be. And I surrendered to death. And the next thing, I was up and he was frantically trying to release me. And, um, but I'm great. I'm grateful. I wasn't raped. Like, I'm grateful that I didn't have a whole, like, there was always something to be grateful for in a really tough spot. And um, and I think so, like I said, that post-traumatic growth, I'm really, really looking to dig into a little bit more.
Of course you are, because that's who you are. It's like out of the ashes, the phoenix arises, right? It's like, where can I grow? What can I learn? How do I move forward? But it's even bigger than that, Janice, because you're a teacher. You take this and everything that you do, you want to help. You want to help give people hope. You want to point them the way. Sometimes they don't want to go the way, but you want to help lead and guide them. So how do you take all of this, and I love what you do with your kids and what you're doing with life, and you have a team. So how do you take these lessons, because there's some people who are listening and they run teams, they're running companies. Everyone has a story. How do you take these lessons in gratitude and teach them to your team?
Well, I think one of the things, over the last several years that I've really, I guess I've kind of taken down some of the walls, because I found that, when I wasn't, I guess, allowing myself to be vulnerable, or allowing myself to be seen or to be heard, that it was creating obstacles. I was creating obstacles for myself. Right. And when it comes to like our team and gratitude, we've just been through COVID. And, you know, I was sort of tasked at the beginning of COVID to like reach out to our team and to communicate. I honestly had no idea. Right. And there were times where I had to make decisions, or share the news of decisions that were made, that were going to affect staff, where I'll take my moment and I will be emotional about it. I am an emotional being, and I'm learning to I guess to find that that's a source of how I'm able to do what I do. Like if I try to be like, I'm just going to be, you know, a hard ass and not show that, I can't do the work that I do. Right. So it's it's weird because as a woman, sometimes we're told there's the whole like, oh, she's the difficult woman, or or she's too emotional, like all those stereotypes of what women are. And I'm like, yeah, I am, like,
Yeah.
yeah, I am emotional. Yeah, I do challenge, but I think I've like grown to be a lot more comfortable with it, because it's a role that nobody else is really fulfilling,
Hmm.
right? I work, and I always have, not just now, but with men. So yeah, like I am the emotional woman. Yeah, I am the challenging woman, but it's that emotion and that challenging where I'm willing to like have the difficult conversations
Hmm.
in a good way. Like sometimes they're not, those difficult conversations aren't good. Sometimes you just like put it out on the table and you let it do what it needs to do.
Right.
Other times, you just you have to be like, I know this is really tough news, and I feel for you.
Hmm.
Like I really do. And you can only do that, I think, for me, I can only really do it if I do it and bring it from an authentic place. So I don't get a lot of feedback from my team, but I hope that they recognize how much emotional effort like I put into the work, because like I think about their contribution, and I don't just think about them, I think about their families. Like I think about, why we are all in, this space together. I think we're pretty darn lucky.
Yeah.
So I also share that too. I like, so me, like I'm kind of known for being a little bit cheesy too. But I wear the cheese with pride.
Oh, I just love that
Because
you own who you are. Like you just literally own who you are. This is who I am.
so, but if, you know, I think that the cheese or all of those things, is where I want them to feel a little bit of that passion and
Mm.
enthusiasm. I want them to feel like I'm constantly, whether it's running a meeting or organizing a conference, or some in-service training. I always first focus on the energy.
Yeah.
I'm like, then I go, okay, now what are the things that we want to achieve? What are the pain points? But never forget the energy.
Mm.
So that helps me with the structure of things and how people flow. I can tell the difference when I get tired and I withdraw.
Yeah.
And I feel bad. But sometimes I'm like, it's hard being the front like energy person.
So pause that thought for just a moment. I'm going to put out for whoever's watching it. If you have questions for Janice, will you ask them? I have Facebook up this time, and also in the chat. So if you have a comment or question for her, please let us know, and then I'll ask her that. So going back into Janice, what you were saying is energy, and you get tired. How do you bring balance? Because you wear so many hats. You wear so many hats. How do you take care of you?
Not as well as I should. Um, I guess if anything, it's it's I guess it would be moderation. Like I know when I'm tired, and I'm, of course, I'm not as young as I once was. Uh, so there's that factor that comes in. So, being, looking at how listening to my body, I suppose. So, that's a tough question because I'm not doing a great job of it right now.
But you own it, right? So what would you want to do?
So I know like sleep is huge.
Yeah.
And so, but do you know that during COVID, that was like this hallelujah of COVID for me. It was the first time in 10 years that I could be the first person to go to sleep and
Mm.
not have to worry about other people. right? So, sleep was one of the blessings of COVID. Um, no, but I find that as I get older, that I become more mindful of moving.
Mm.
Like I'm an extremist when it comes to doing things. So that's why I fall in and out of exercising, like I guess a program. Because I can't just go like I'm just gonna do 2 days a week. I have to do like whole hog 5 a.m. cooking turkey breast or chicken breast at like 6 in the morning before I go to the office. That's not really sustainable. So I'm looking for sustaining that.
So what's
um
your word for this year then?
uh oh god, I saw your post and I haven't figured it out yet. Last year I didn't have a word. I had sort of a theme. It was the trifecta.
Hmm.
Last year's was elevate, rise, and expand. And for me, it was elevate, and it kind of carries forward, but it's elevate, rise, and expand into joy and celebration.
Ooh.
So I recognize that I said joy isn't sort of a natural occurrence for me. And it wasn't actually really until I wrote the piece in the book that I really understood why celebration is so difficult for me. Like I've always really wanted to have like this biggest, brightest birthday party ever. Um, and because if you read in the book, like they were shameful, tormented, you know, um, build you up and slam you to the ground experiences for me. So I'm actually celebration is a huge thing for me going into 2021. First of all, I'm hoping that we're going to celebrate the end of COVID.
Right.
But I also moved into a house, which was a great achievement uh, for me, which has a big deck. And I'm like, that's what we named the house when we didn't own it and we were just stocking it, called it Big Deck. And that, I have this vision of being able to, have celebrations, to barbecue and to have
Mm.
fellowship
Yeah.
with other people. That's like sort of the vision and the dream for
Mm.
this year for me.
So being joy and having celebration.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So so final thoughts. What message? So there are different people who watch this. Some are watching it live. Some people watch it later. There's always a message that people usually need to hear. And knowing your journey and knowing the power of leaning into gratitude. If someone's struggling right now, or they've kind of lost hope, or they don't know what to do, what advice could you give to them?
Um, and it's actually what I tell my oldest daughter is when you're consumed by worry and darkness, and I do disclose, I think in more of a Cole's Notes version, is that I have been experienced depression to the point where one day the river was far too close. Um, and that, I never want to go back to that darkness. So I have compassion for people that are in that space and fighting for the light, right? And so what I say is like, just find one thing. I said, and aspire to it. Like, even if it means moving your toes because you haven't moved at all. Like, if it means you can't take a step, but you can, you know, you body pull yourself, a couple inches across the floor to get to a next spot, just do it.
Mm.
It is, you know, the only way through the mud is through it. And you're not going to be able to jump out in one quick movement. So and give yourself grace, right? And it's the one thing I've had to, I really have had to learn, is to give myself grace. Yeah, so that and you can, and I challenge anybody, like even those that might, be like, oh, it's a craptastic day. It has been the craptastic year. I'm like, I challenge you. Like, I'm sure that you can find one thing.
Yes.
The sun is shining, you know, um, it's not minus 800 degrees out. It could still be really cold, but it could always be colder, right? And just find something to lean into. And because I promise you, you find that's a great thing about gratitude, is like, you'll find one thing to be grateful for, and it's like it will just fuel the next thing and the next thing.
I
Right.
have,
And so that,
I just, I, I could just listen to you forever. And you're so inspiring. Knowing, and I can't say this enough, just you're one of those women that I look up to. Strong, courageous, dedicated, the no excuses, no armor on your back. Yeah, you've had a shitty hand, but you never said, this is the hand I was dealt and this is what I'm going to. You said, this is what happened, but I'm going to move forward. And because of that, and I go over and over, Janice, you teach people how to lean in. You teach people that there's another way. You teach people that they can have hope, that they don't have to be stuck, that their mess can truly become their message. Grace, gratitude, life, being cheesy, having passion, being transparent. That's what this world needs. They need leaders like you. And I just thank you for showing up. I have Vicky said so many amazing messages. And Donna says, Janice is an amazing example of resilience as a survivor of child welfare system and violence against women, a true hero for many, an Indigenous role model and mentor for the youth aging out of care and for women who are victims of domestic violence. I commend you, Janice Gladue. Woo! Thank you. Thank you for being willing to share your story. Thank you for being willing to play bigger. Thank you for being what we need in this time and giving us hope.
and I want to thank you. Back in 2011, there were some other things that came up while we were coaching, and that affected my daughter, that were really tough. But we did an exercise during that time, and my God, I remembered, that is imprinted in my head. And it was one of those guided meditations, and you brought me to my future self. And my future self, well, she was fit, well, not for an old gal, but she was peace, and she was love. And I always kind of remember that version of me, and it's sort of been part of sort of like a touchstone for me. Right. So it's weird because, like you said, I've known you for a long time, but we didn't meet until last year. And you have been, a great cheerleader, a supporter, challenger. And your energy and enthusiasm, is inspiring to me. So I thank you. And thank you for asking me to do this, because again, it's not in my comfort zone. And I reminded you that, when I went to Bold, that one of, the fear, the fear that was fear of being seen and being heard. You asked me why I participated in the book, in writing a piece, and that was why. is because I'm sort of leaning into that fear, to reframe it, to find my power over that fear. So when you asked me, I was like, ugh, like honestly, I did the behind the, but I said yes, and
Thank you.
but I'm really glad that I did.
Oh my gosh, I love you. Er. So would you hold up your book one more time just so that people can see it, also posted on the Facebook? Um,
Certainly.
it is The Great Canadian Woman, and it is now on Amazon. She is strong and free. And it's
Yes.
Janice Gladue is one of the authors within that book.
And there's stories of some other amazing women that I'm sure will be helpful to others as well.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again. Thank you for your time. Thank you for just being who you are. I'm so honored to know you. And just remember, next week we have at 3 o'clock Pacific Standard Time, it will be the Leadership Now business leader panelists that are going to be talking about the lessons of 2020 and really what they're doing to move into 2021. So until then, we will see you next week. Thanks again, Janice.
Thank you.